Thank you, everybody, to coming out to another one of our events. This is Building the Sales Machine. I am Eric Friedman. Want to give a quick shout out to a couple of my co-hosts, Dave Greenberger, who is around here somewhere. Big thanks to Dave for helping out. Yeah, there it is. And our other co-host, Evan Bartlett, who couldn't make it this evening. Thanks to all of you for coming out. Those of you who have returned for another event, we really appreciate it. Those of you who are new to the event, we've got note cards and Sharpies on every table, and I'm going to have Dave come around in a little bit and collect those cards. Feel free to write down questions that you want us to ask up on stage here. We want to get to the topics that you guys want to talk about. Before we get started, I also want to say a big thanks to Scaled.com. That's SKALED.com. Helping small and medium-sized businesses scale their sales efforts. Quick round of applause and thanks to them for sponsoring the event tonight. Thank you. A couple of Scaled folks are here tonight. Jake, I know, is in the back. Maybe raise your hand. And I think some other folks too. Feel free to ask them questions about scaling your business. No surprise. Finally, our guest of honor tonight, Bryan Rutcofsky from Yext. I want to thank you for coming in, VP of Sales at Yext on the SMB side of the business. We'll get into what it is you do. But big thanks to Bryan for coming out tonight. And with that, we'll get started. So thanks. So why don't we start with a quick intro, and before I let you go off, I want to say that we try to skip the fluff at these events, and we're going to get right into questions that you and I talked about. If you guys have questions at each table, again, Dave's going to come around, pick up the note cards, and we'll try and get some of those up on stage, and then we'll leave time at the end for Q&A. Let's get started.
Sure. So I have been at Yext for going on 8 years. I started my career actually as an outside sales rep for a telecom company in Florida. Spent about 5 years down there. In the last 8 years, I've been at Yext. I have built, I'd say, probably 4 or 5 different inside sales teams at Yext, anywhere from 5 to 10 salespeople all the way up to about 150. For the past year and a half or so, I also moved over to also grow the partner side of the house and grow some inbound field sellers for the partnerships, which obviously I can explain more later if people care to ask. But I guess we'll jump into some more of the meat of the topics of growing these teams.
So 8 years, that was a long time ago. In startup years, that's an eternity.
Yeah, for sure.
So how did this all begin with Gym Ticket?
So Gym Ticket, very simply, was a directory designed to drive leads to health clubs, throughout the U.S. We had sort of the idea and the vision. I came on board to gymticket.com. This predates, changing the name to Alpha 411, and then eventually transitioning to Yext, and then a company split, and then half the company being sold. So there's been a lot of sort of, I should say, a long journey to get to where we are today. But the Gym Ticket model was a pretty simple, basic model of selling leads to small businesses. And my goal was to figure out how to essentially crack that model. How are we going to sell these leads to SMBs, and then how do you train other people to come in and do the same thing, and grow a team around me to eventually attack and conquer that market. So I came in to the company. This was in April of 2007. I think when I first interviewed, we had about 50 clubs or health clubs that were clients. The day I actually started, president of the company had closed one of the larger deals at the time for around 250 new clubs. So we were just over the 300 mark when I joined. About 10 months later, we were around 2,000 plus clubs nationwide, eventually growing to around 4,000. And that's when sort of the founders of the company, who obviously I've worked very close with for the past 8 years, sort of realized that we have a model here of selling leads to SMBs. And so I guess the question sort of came out as like, well, what else can we sell? What other model, how else can we replicate this model and do this again for other industries? And that's where the company transitioned to what became a placeholder name for, which was Alpha 411, which then eventually became Yext, growing and selling leads into dozens of vertical markets across the U.S.
So I know a lot of people here are at the early stages of their business, maybe scaling it up. In the early days, you guys were doing some pretty scrappy things. How did you validate this model? The success story you just mapped out sounds good, but how did you know you were on the right track? And how did you validate what you were doing was actually, this is what we should be spending time and energy on?
Sure. So it was actually interesting. The way the founders, the CEO, sort of decided on what vertical markets we were going after was essentially just scanning the yellow pages and looking at every different specific category that existed and what might be a potential, good vertical that we could, offer or sell leads into. And then doing some market testing, buying keywords, driving traffic to, sites that we had generated to see what kind of consumer interest there was, and then determining based on the consumer interest, was there actually, a model that we could sell into. So we quickly realized that there were clearly vertical markets that we couldn't sell into. They wouldn't buy leads. One of the big ones that, was, hurt a little bit was because it's such a large market was restaurants. Restaurants don't buy leads. Restaurants don't buy phone calls. Eventually what we evolved, I kind of skipped a step here. We evolved from selling leads into cracking a model on selling phone calls and what we called paper action phone calls. And what that essentially means is we had a technology in-house that was able to take a recording of a phone call, parse the voice from the conversation into text, and then used an algorithm that determined based on the text keywords that we were able to see whether the call was related to new business. And then if the call was related to new business, we would bill for that phone call. And if it was not related to new business, that call was essentially free and on the house. So it didn't fall under the mold of the pay-per call model, so we sort of created the new term pay-per action phone call, so that we were actually billing for a reasonable business intro, for whichever vertical market we were into. So as far as testing the market, it was. There's no simple way to say it other than I locked myself in a conference room with a few spreadsheets and just started smiling and dialing. It's the only way to figure out if people were going to buy a product and then figure out what that product was that they were going to buy. And it was sort of on my shoulders to say we kind of understand what we want the model to be, but what exactly is each industry willing to purchase? And you learn quickly that certain business owners view their clients or their customers or their patients very, very differently. And so I learned quickly, for example, in the veterinarian model that, they could care less about making money. All they care about is saving the puppy's life, which is noble. There's nothing wrong with that, but, if me as a sales guy, I got to sell a product, I need to find a way to get them to purchase it. Versus, for example, the chiropractor industry, where not only were these guys doctors, but they also had a head for marketing, and they were very interested in driving new business and turning new clients into more dollars for their practice. So it was a lot of just sort of trial and error, making these phone calls, having conversations with business owners, and essentially the model, the business on whether or not we were going to, the decision on whether or not we were actually going to roll out a business for the sales team was determined on if I could actually get people to give me a credit card over the phone to buy my product without a website and without a real product existing, but just the concept of the product that I would sort of deliver. And if I was able to do that within 24 hours to get, one or two credit cards, we were relatively confident that we could roll that out to a sales team and teach them how to do it as well. And thankfully, we were right.
A lot of people here actually expressed to me they are a one-person sales team. Sounds like similar situation to you. You locked yourself in a room, tried to figure it out. How do you go from 1 to 2? And then when you start to see some of the success, how do you think about scaling out that type of a team? Who do you hire? You talked about the first salesperson. How can they build? How can they lead? Some of those things. Like how did you go from just you to 2 to 4 to 8, et cetera?
Well, funny enough, 2 of my first hires, I think one may have left, but the other one's still in the room right over here. Hi, Claire. It was just sort of, the decision was made that, okay, we understand that this is a product that can be sold, and we obviously, it's time to grow. I can only make a certain number of sales in a given day. I was brought on to figure out if the product can be sold, but then, of course, bring new people on to teach them how to sell the same product and grow the team out. And so once the model is set and I knew that I could, it was a very highly, transaction sale, so I was able to bring in 3 or 4 or 5 new businesses a day. If I could replicate that across, 5 people, obviously, the business grows much faster. So we made the conscious decision, actually 2 decisions. One was that we we wanted to be inside sellers. The model that is still very popular, that was very popular back in 2007, 2008, was to have feet on the street in each individual market, but that's extremely costly. If we're here based in New York, it's very hard to sort of manage and monitor the actual activity of what's going on, for sellers, across different states. You typically have to hire people that have sales experience who obviously want a bit more money, if they're going to be outside sellers and doing that in their hometown or in their home city. So we made the conscious decision to keep everything in-house, do inside sales, and then I sort of, along with the help of the leaders and the founders of Yext, decided to just bring on green sellers, people that didn't have sales experience before, but people that we believed would be that had the confidence and the ability and the tenacity to be successful in the organization. And we were very, very strict about our initial sales hires. I speak a lot about making sure when you're building out a new team, especially if you're a sales team of 1 right now or a sales team of 2, the first 3 to 4 hires you make, these are the people that you have to believe you're going to build your sales organization around. And if you don't fully believe that the people you've just brought into your company can be the leaders of the sales team as you move forward, you hired the wrong people. If you're looking for people that are just comfortable selling, making commissions and making a salary, but don't want more from their career and don't want to grow, you absolutely hired the wrong person. You want someone that's willing to commit fully to a sales role, knowing that there is opportunity to grow and there is more that will be available to them as the company grows. As it's a small company, you're obviously, we'll talk, I guess, a little bit about selling that vision of a small company, and then grow that team and grow, specifically grow the way you want to. I think, a mistake that that I've made, that I've seen other sales leaders and other sales teams make, is also trying to hire too aggressively and trying to hire too quickly. I'm a firm believer of sort of the 50% rule. I will never hire a sales class that is that is larger than 50% of my sales floor. So if I only have 10 sellers on my floor, I will never hire more than 5 people. And that sort of speaks to just like the culture, right? I work very hard in hiring the right people, developing the right culture, having them sort of buy into my vision and my community for my sales team. And when you bring in a class that is larger than the existing base, that can infect the culture that you've worked so hard to build, and you need the existing base to sort of overpower whatever feedback and thought process these new people coming in may have, and sort of infuse them with what you want them to know and how you want them to act and how you want them to respond. So while some people just want to jump in and hire 20, 30, 40 people and get rocking and rolling because, look, it's selling, it's working, it's great, it can actually sort of destroy the sales environment and the sales culture and actually take the business in the opposite direction.
To a sponsored question we got from the folks at Scaled, how do you get to that type of scale, frankly, with a team when you need to hire 10 people, 20 people, 30 people overnight, but you don't want to, say, get a team on board that's 50% larger than the previous class, when you have something that works and you're ready to hire a ton of people?
So I think it's, I think the answer to that is I would use, and again, I was actually joking with Dave earlier, if Scaled, existed back in 2008, 2009 when we were launching all of these new verticals, that would have been sort of the perfect, replacement for me from what I had to do was pull people from my existing sales team who were successful salespeople and put them into a new sales sort of test to see if this was actually going to grow as quickly or as well as we would have liked. And there are people in this room that obviously were there with me through that time that know there were definitely some vertical markets that we entered into that were not as successful as others. And had we had the opportunity to use a company like Scale to sort of help get through that initial stage and that initial process, I think it would have made the decision for me to move people from one vertical to another and grow sales teams out much easier, because I would have had a much sort of firmer knowledge base of what's going to happen when we actually go into this market, as opposed to saying, okay, let's just figure it out and see what happens. So the question is, like, when you track the metrics to understand what you thought would bring success, when did you stop tracking the metric and just implement it into the team? And I think the answer to that question, I don't ever stop tracking the metrics. I don't think that I've crack the code for good on what the best sales process is. So we're always tracking metrics. We're always trying to figure out, can we get better? Can I get, more sales, and how do I do that? And I tell sort of everybody when I hand them, so I walk through in my sales training sort of a call intro and how I expect every single person, and there's probably about a half a dozen, if not more people in this room that have been through this call intro training, how I expect you to open up every single call, every single time you pick up the phone to dial out to a new business. And again, I don't care if you're in a highly transactional sale where I expect 3 or 4 a day, or you're in a sale where I expect one sale a quarter or one sale every 6 to 8 months. This is how I want you to open the phone call, because it's how you get to the decision maker. And so when you say track the metrics, all I tell people is, if you find a better way, prove it. If you can prove it, your way becomes the way. Because it would be silly of me to think that the way that I teach people to do it is the best way. It's the best way that I've figured out thus far, but it doesn't mean there's not a better way. So we never stop tracking metrics. We always want to see if there's a way to improve on what we have.
I'd love to know what you think you spent too much time on and what you spent too little time on. Because I think right now there is a lot of folks deal with paralysis of action. There's so many things to do, and they're not sure where they should spend their time and energy and effort. And it'd be great to hear what you guys maybe spend too much time on and spend too little time on.
So for me personally, from my experience, especially early on, I think I spent a little too much time trying to crack the code and figure out the model of what's going to be the perfect pitch and the best way to sell this and the right way to do anything for each specific industry. And I think I wish I would have just, kind of started doing it. Right? Enough of drawing on the whiteboard and deciding if we sell at this price point and bring it in, at this level and this number of clients, and doing all the math and figuring out what makes a profitable business. Just get on the phones, right? Just figure it out. Talk to the customers, see what they want, see what they're interested in, and get real-time feedback, not assumptions based on previous experience that I've had from different verticals that may not be relevant at all to what we were doing in the current time. And I know I'm talking a lot about the historical, Yext days back in 2008, 2009, but I do think that was a mistake I had made, and who knows? Maybe we could have launched more verticals, or done more had we just sort of dove in head first to some other ones. Things I wish I spent a little bit more time on. It's something I think that I've tried to course correct in sort of my recent years here, is the career development of those new hires that you brought in. Like I said, you hire these core group of individuals that you expect to grow the sales team around, and then you sort of catch fire, and the company starts growing, and you're hiring rapidly, and all of a sudden you're taking one of your guys who was or girls, a top manager, a top salesperson, a top performer, and asking them now to lead a group of people, and because I was hiring right out of school, or maybe 6 to 8 months of sales experience, I'm asking a 23 or 24-year-old who never had management experience to now manage essentially a group of their peers, and that's a very daunting task. And I think that had I personally spent more time just sort of coaching on proper techniques and way to handle certain situations, and ways to have certain discussions, and just simple things on how to send an email to your team. You say tactical, I know it sounds silly, it may sound stupid, but I rarely, if ever, use the words I or you in an email when I send it to my team. It's always we and us. And again, it may sound obvious, but it's never me against them. It's we are in this together, trying to figure it out, whether it's good news or bad news. And so just having that conversation, and just those little coaching tidbits that you could give over time to make them respected as leaders in the organization.
How did you deal with coming up with comp plans?
Comp plans are always a fun topic. I always, when I explain a comp plan to people, I have this sort of I always tell everybody, look, I have $1, right? And I can rip up that dollar a million different ways. But at the end of the day, when I piece it all back together, it's still only $1. So however I design the comp plan, everyone kind of needs to understand that there is a certain OTE, on target earning, that's expected for this role. And we're going to figure out, what the right way to achieve that compensation, to also achieve maximum effectiveness and efficiency out of the, sales rep is going to be. So there was definitely a time where comp probably changed more often than I would have liked in the early days, and I can also say, that I'm very happy that from my small business team at Yext currently, I don't think we've changed the comp plan other than adding incentives and bonuses in 3.5 years. Just because it's a model that works, it sets the proper expectations, and we know that it drives exactly what we want our salespeople to do. So, when it comes to designing comp, especially if you're early on and just hiring, I would say figure out what you expect, the OTE to be for your new hire or for your sales team. And then I would also say just expect to pay them that full amount for a certain period of time until you get a true understanding of what can be done and what the actual expectation and close ratio or sales rate can be, depending on obviously the sales model that you have, and then build around that. The idea would be to just understand what you're willing to pay, and I would even say probably overpay a little bit in the beginning, which all the salespeople obviously love to hear, but overpay in the beginning to get people to work harder for you, because even though people love to say they're not money motivated, when people make a fat commission check, they are definitely very, very happy. So make sure that you're just treating them right, and doing right by them, especially early on. Don't hold people, don't hold their feet to the fire over specific numbers, if you know that they're doing everything that's right and everything you expect of them to help achieve success in the business.
How did you set milestones in those early days? You had a bunch of people, you were scaling up the team very quickly. How did you set the measures of success for both themselves, for you as a leader, and so everybody would know when and if they hit those milestones?
So I'm a firm believer for any sales leader to not ask their employees or their salespeople to do anything that they wouldn't be willing to do themselves. So the way that I was able to benchmark and the way that I was able to set milestones was to do it myself. And if I knew that I could reasonably bring in X number of transactions a day, a week, a month, a quarter, whatever the sales cycle might be for each individual business, then I can expect someone else to do that. I would probably set the milestone or the benchmark a little bit lower than what I was able to do, just because I have experience. I've been selling for 18 years at this point. I don't expect someone who has 6 months of sales experience to do as well as I can do. That might be cocky, and there's definitely going to be people that are going to come in and do better than I have. And I love when I have salespeople that I look at. I'm like, this person is far better than I ever was at closing closing sales. So I would set the benchmark probably at 80% of what my expectation for myself would be, and that's typically where it would fall. And then as you grow the team, you kind of realize as you mature in different markets, that goal line can move higher or lower based on the industry.
Can you talk to us about script versus process?
Sure.
And coming up with them and then going to market?
So scripting for me, I don't love scripts. I'm not a huge fan of scripting out the entire sales process, though I've done it for every single sales org that I run, because I think it is important for a new salesperson to have a specific script to follow. And a lot of the scripts are actually verbatim what you should say word for word. Like you literally don't have to look up from the paper, and you can read right through it, and it gets you through exactly what you need to say. The idea behind that is I literally essentially just want my salespeople to memorize those scripts, not so they can spit them back to me word for word, but so that they understand the value propositions that I want them to hit on and achieve throughout the course of a call. Typically, there's 3 to 5 for any pitch that you're going through, and then I want a salesperson to find their own voice, right? I speak about that a lot when I talk to salespeople, because I don't ever expect 2 salespeople to sell the same way. I teach a lot about the psychology of sales, and if there's different types of buyers and different types of different reasons people will make a buying decision, there's absolutely different types of sellers that exist out there, and the different ways that people are going to approach sales for each individual business owner. So I want you to have the information. I want you to know everything, as a employee for my company, and then speak to each business owner as you would, in any specific conversation you want to have. The other thing that, as part of that pitch is, again, I preach a lot about, again, the psychology behind sales and all that, but I expect the sales rep to have 100% of the information. And to be a very good sales rep, you need to understand that you have 100% of the information. each client only needs about 30 to 40% of what you have, and what's going to make you really successful is learning very quickly which 30, 40% you should be sharing, and don't share anything else. Because when you overshare, when you speak too much, that's at the end of the call when you're like, well, that's a lot of information. I appreciate your time. I'm going to have to think this over. If you give them exactly the information they're looking for and that's it, there really isn't anything to think over anymore, and you can move further along in the sales process.
That's great. Maybe we'll take a question from the audience.
So we used the yellow pages early on to try and figure out what the interesting verticals would be that we could go into. And it wasn't so much that the yellow pages was letting us know what the interests that existed. It was more so these are the different categories we think we might be able to launch a business into. After that was done, it was a lot of market testing as far as not sales testing, but just we would create a site to drive consumer traffic to see if there was actual consumer interest online. Are people looking for veterinarians online? Are people looking for auto glass shops online? Right? If there's interest for that, then okay, we now see that people are actually searching for this type of business online. Now it's, well, when they pick up the phone and call this business, is there actually a transaction that takes place? So in the example of a restaurant, there really isn't a transaction. People weren't, for the most part, asking for reservations, which maybe is like a model you can sell into, for example, OpenTable, right? But people were asking for the hours of operation, and no restaurant's going to pay for a phone call where somebody says, "Are you guys open tonight?" and the guy says yes, right? So we had to find businesses where the calls actually led to some sort of transaction or what could be a transaction. So in the example of the veterinarian, it's like hey, we just adopted a new puppy from the vet. I'm sorry, from the pound, where we need to bring them in for their first shots and have them checked out. Is there availability next Tuesday, right? So if that phone call came through, we would charge for that phone call, and that's sort of how we built that model. So we had to determine if there was actually going to be a not only consumer interest, but a product that was there that could be sold. When you have a rock star, a top performer, is there something that you can point to specifically that would differentiate them from the average performer or the expected performer on the floor? And the kind of ratio. So the best I've ever seen was about 2.5x the average performer. Again, going back to what I teach in sales training, I teach a lot about the act of sales and the art of sales. So some people just generally have the knack and the talent and the art to be a good salesperson. It can be learned, but the act of selling can be taught to anybody if you're willing to learn how to do it. So what I think actually the differentiator is that people that have just a good art of sales, unfortunately, inherently are lazy because they're good at the job. So they don't have to work as hard to do what is expected of them. So the one individual, and it's only been one in this amount of time, who is just that much better than everybody else. Typically, it's like they'll be performing at 130, or a top performer is 130 or 140% of goal, maybe 180% of goal. This person was consistently 250% of goal, and to his credit, what he had was an unbelievable knack for selling and the work ethic of a horse. The guy just didn't stop. Any day, didn't get distracted by anything else that was going on around him in the office, would come in, would get on the phones, would do his job from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and nothing else stopped. Nothing else got in the way. He'd take a quick break for lunch. Maybe he'd walk around the office once, but there was no side chit-chat. There was nothing. He came in to do his job, be successful at it, and go home and make the biggest commission checks he could possibly make. So I think the answer to the question is that the differentiator to me is that it comes down to work ethic and the willingness to put forth the effort. And like I said, typically what you'll find happen is that if you set a goal, human nature is to come within just about 85 to 90% of that goal, and then they kind of know that they're safe and they're not going to lose their job over that. So when people sort of find what it takes in order to be at that level and never have to really worry, that's about as hard as they'll ever work. And so that's why sometimes it's important to always just keep increasing that goal so you know that you can push more and more out of people. But at the end of the day, I think all it really came down to was just the dedication and work ethic of that specific individual that just refused to do anything other than be the best that he could be at the job. Quantifiable metric on the resume to determine if I would hire or at least meet the individual. So for me, Again, I think it goes back to just looking at things like, kind of looking at the timeline of their resume and the jobs that they held, if they held jobs. That would be a big thing for me. A lot of people will put on, especially if they're in college, like intramural activities that they were involved in, even like fraternal organizations. Again, social environment where you have to be, an outgoing type person. That's the type of person I would look for and be willing to bring in, at least for a conversation. Again, for me, as I said earlier, like I'm not a huge believer in resumes because, to be honest, you can write whatever the fuck you want on a resume. But when you get in the office, that's when I actually get to meet you and see who you are and find out what kind of person you are. So I'm probably more willing or likely to meet more people than I actually should, which is why I don't do the resume screening anymore. So people know, what I like to meet and who I want to meet with and who I want to have conversations with. But for me, when I would look at a resume, to me, that would be like, yeah, I'll absolutely meet this person, and then they can walk in the door and just, be absolutely terrible. And that's another thing that I've gotten better at myself. I used to give everyone, as nice as it was, the respect of at least 25 to 30 minutes for an interview. If I know now within the first 5 or 10 minutes that this is not going to be a fit, I just cut it short, and I thank you for your time. And I know it sucks for the person that probably traveled to come into the office, but I'm not going to waste their time. I'm not going to waste my time if I know it's not going to work. The question is, we started with an outbound focus, and now we have more of an inbound lead gen focus. And to be quite honest, I think any sales team wants to have just inbound leads flowing in on any given day so they can make those dials. It was just, again, a lot of trial and error. So when it came to the initial, run of Yext, where it was very, heavily outbound dials, don't get me wrong, we absolutely tried to generate as much inbound, traffic as we could. It's just, I guess, the draw for the customer wasn't as large as it is, say, today for the Yext Power Listings product. For the calls product, I mean, for those guys that were here selling back, back in the day, everyone knows what a submit is, and submits were treated like gold, because that was somebody that said, I'm interested in potentially learning about this calls product. And I mean, these guys would get hammered on the phone to try and get them to sell. There was a lot of trial and error testing to drive the inbound lead flow that we get now for the current small business team at Yext. And thankfully, and again, to say that we aren't still, tweaking and tinkering with that model would be wrong, because we're always trying to figure out better ways to increase that volume. But, our inbound team now is just chock full of inbound leads and inbound interest. So I don't even have the necessity to have somebody pick up the phone to make an essential cold call, because there's enough inbound traffic to keep them busy with people that have showed some sort of level of interest in the product. So the question is, hiring a lot of, green salespeople, when do you make the decision, or do you make the decision to hire people from competitors or people that have experience in the space or in the industry? And I think the answer to that question really just relies on the type of sale you're going after. For example, the enterprise team at Yext does look for people that have, industry experience and agency experience and selling to the large enterprise level clients and that background, because it's such a large sale, you don't want to spend the time, training the sales. If the sales process itself is 6 to 9 months for a deal that size, I don't want to waste 6 months training somebody so then they can start making a sale 6 to 9 months later. All of a sudden, we're 15 months into your hire and you're making your first deal. I don't have the time for that, right? For me, I can hire somebody within 2 weeks, have them closing deals on the phone, and so that's why I think that where that the sort of the split comes. We have definitely hired a few people on the small business and partner team that do have sales experience, but again, one of the kind of the firm things I believe in. The reason I'm not a huge fan of people with inside sales experience is because everyone with inside sales experience has bad habits, and I'd much rather teach you my bad habits than break the ones that you have. So the question is, when we launched a new vertical, how did we sort of take the feedback from the customers and then use that effectively to tweak the model and make it work right for each specific industry or vertical? And again, the answer to that is, once we knew we had a sellable business, meaning we knew we had a vertical that we can actually successfully reach, you can reach the decision maker, you can have an intelligent enough conversation, and you can get them to buy the product over the phone. We knew we could start, putting salespeople into that business itself. Then it was a lot of just, again, this again goes back to my previous point of your initial hires need to be your core people, need to be the people you can trust. These are the people I would put on these new verticals, because I knew that I could stop them from doing what they were doing for an hour, pull them into a room and just have a conversation about what are you hearing, what are the objections, what is the feedback we're getting from the clients on the sales process. And we would do the same thing obviously on the support side as well, and that would lead to tweaks in the pricing model, tweaks in the ways that we would actually pitch the service. It led to tweaks in the pitch itself, meaning in the verbiage that we use. So again, like things I would say is obvious and simple, but like when you talk to a doctor, don't talk about customers, you talk about patients, right? And these are things that you just have to remember. And like if I'm calling the auto glass guy 2 seconds ago and now I'm picking up the phone and calling a chiropractor, I have to make sure that my verbiage is spot on. And so I made people that I made sure people became sort of an industry expert overnight as quickly as they could, or at least sound like they knew what they were talking about. But it was a lot of dealing with my core group of hires that I could trust, that I knew when they were telling me the feedback, it wasn't because they wanted to bitch and moan about the quality of leads. It's they want this to work because they want to scale this out so they can move up and do more within the organization.